Most people believe that if they work harder than everyone else, eventually someone will notice. They believe that being helpful earns respect, that staying late shows commitment, and that solving problems nobody asked them to solve demonstrates leadership. For a while, that belief feels true. You answer messages after hours, jump into projects that aren't yours, and fix mistakes you didn't create. You become the person everyone can count on, the dependable one, the reliable one, the team player. Then something strange happens. The more available you become, the less valuable your time seems to be. People stop asking whether you're busy before giving you more work. They stop appreciating the extra effort. What once looked like generosity slowly becomes an expectation. One day, you realize something uncomfortable. The people around you no longer see your availability as a sacrifice. They see it as normal. At first, that feels unfair. You tell yourself you've simply been overlooked. Maybe your manager doesn't notice. Maybe your coworkers take advantage of you. Maybe the company is full of selfish people. Sometimes that's true, but most of the time, something else is happening, something far less personal and far more important to understand. What you're experiencing isn't an accident. It's a system, a pattern that exists in almost every workplace. Whether it's a multinational corporation, a small business, a startup, or a traditional hierarchy, different industries and different cultures may look unique on the surface, but the underlying logic is remarkably similar. Once you understand that logic, you stop asking the wrong question. Instead of wondering why people don't appreciate you, you begin asking something much more useful. What have I unintentionally taught them about the value of my time? That question changes everything. Your availability became invisible. The process rarely begins with a major decision. It usually starts with something small, a task nobody officially assigned, a problem nobody owned, or a deadline someone else was about to miss. Because you're helpful, you step in. Just this once, you tell yourself. Then it happens again and again. Before long, people start bringing those problems directly to you. Not because they're malicious, and not because they consciously decided to exploit you. They do it because you've established a pattern. You've become the easiest solution available. Think about the last project where you contributed far more than anyone realized. The one where you carried most of the workload. The one where your effort made the difference between success and failure. What happened afterward? Did people remember the hours you invested? Or did they simply remember the result? Most organizations remember outcomes, not sacrifices. And that's where many professionals make a costly mistake. They assume effort automatically creates visibility. It doesn't. Visible effort creates visibility. There's a difference, and it's much larger than most people realize. Every time you solve someone else's problem quietly, you remove the evidence that the problem ever existed. The project succeeds, the crisis disappears, the deadline gets met, and because everything worked out, nobody sees what it cost you. Ironically, the better you become at rescuing situations behind the scenes, the easier it becomes for people to overlook your contribution. Your competence begins to hide itself. Over time, the organization learns that your workload can expand without resistance, that your energy is available whenever something goes wrong, and that your time can be redistributed whenever necessary. Nobody needs to make that decision consciously. Your behavior teaches it for them. Every workplace develops expectations based on repeated patterns. If you consistently protect your time, people learn to respect your boundaries. If you consistently sacrifice your time, people learn to expect access to it. Neither expectation appears overnight, but both become deeply ingrained once they're established. This is why so many high performers eventually feel invisible. They're involved in everything, solving everyone's problems and carrying responsibilities that often exceed their role. Yet when promotions are discussed, when leadership opportunities appear, or when recognition is handed out, their names rarely come up as often as they expected. They're present in the work, but absent from the narrative. And in most organizations, narratives matter far more than effort. That's a difficult truth to accept, because we want to believe that hard work speaks for itself. In reality, work doesn't speak. Visibility does. Perception does. The stories people tell about who creates value do. If you've spent enough time in the corporate world, you've probably met someone like this. Someone everyone relied on. Someone who seemed indispensable. Someone who carried far more than their share of the burden, and yet remained stuck in the same position year after year. Maybe you've watched it happen. Maybe you've wondered why. Or maybe you're beginning to recognize something uncomfortable. Maybe that person is you. Being useful is not the same as being valuable. One of the most damaging ideas in the workplace is also one of the most common. Nobody says it out loud, yet it's reinforced every day through company culture, performance reviews, leadership advice, and endless conversations about teamwork. The idea is simple. If you're useful enough, you'll eventually be valued. It sounds reasonable. In fact, most people spend years believing it's true. They assume that every extra hour, every favor, and every sacrifice is quietly building a reputation reputation that will eventually be recognized. The harder they work, the more indispensable they become. The more indispensable they become, the more valuable they'll be. But that's not how organizations actually work. Companies don't operate on effort alone. They operate on perception, visibility, incentives, and priorities. The work that gets rewarded isn't always the work that required the most energy. More often, it's the work that's visible to decision makers, attached to strategic objectives, or connected to people who influence outcomes. That's why being useful and being valuable are not the same thing. A useful employee solves problems. A valuable employee is perceived as someone whose contributions directly affect results that matter. Sometimes those two things overlap. Often they don't. And many professionals spend years assuming they're building one when they're actually building the other. The mistake usually begins with good intentions. You want to contribute. You want to be helpful. You want people to see you as dependable. So you say yes when someone needs support. You volunteer when a project is struggling. You step in when nobody else wants to take responsibility. At first, those actions are noticed. People appreciate them. Managers thank you. Coworkers recognize your willingness to help. The extra effort stands out because it isn't expected yet. But expectations have a way of changing. What people initially appreciate, they eventually normalize. What they normalize, they eventually assume. And what they assume rarely receives the same level of recognition it once did. Think about the person in every office who is known for always being available. The person who answers messages immediately, jumps into every crisis, and somehow finds a way to help everyone. At first, that behavior earns admiration. Over time, it simply becomes part of who they're expected to be. Nobody says, "Thank you for helping again." Everyone thinks, "Of course they helped." The behavior hasn't changed. The perception has. That's where many careers quietly begin to stall. The employee believes they're accumulating value because they're contributing more than everyone else. In reality, they're often accumulating accessibility. They've become the easiest person to ask, the easiest person to depend on, and the easiest person to burden with additional responsibilities. Accessibility feels valuable because people constantly seek it out, but accessibility and professional capital are very different things. Professional capital grows when your expertise becomes associated with meaningful outcomes. It grows when leadership trusts your judgment, when your ideas influence decisions, and when your name becomes attached to results that matter. Capital accumulates. It gains weight over time. Accessibility doesn't. Accessibility gets consumed. The more of it you provide, the more people expect. And unlike capital, it doesn't appreciate in value. It becomes easier to take for granted. That's why some of the busiest people in an organization are often the most frustrated. Their calendars are packed. Their workload never seems to shrink. Everyone depends on them. Yet year after year, they find themselves wondering why their effort isn't creating more opportunities. They're moving constantly, but not necessarily moving forward. The problem isn't a lack of work. The problem is where that work is being invested. Every hour spent solving problems that don't increase your visibility is an hour not spent building influence. Every favor that consumes your energy without strengthening your position carries a hidden cost. Every responsibility you absorb simply because nobody else wanted it takes time away from something that could have advanced your own career. Eventually, frustration begins to appear. At first, it's directed outward. You start believing your coworkers are ungrateful. You wonder why leadership doesn't seem to notice everything you do. You watch other people advance and convince yourself the system is rewarding the wrong behaviors. Sometimes that's partially true, but it's rarely the entire story. The deeper issue is that the organization has adapted to your behavior. It has learned that your contribution will continue whether recognition follows or not. It has learned that you'll solve the problem regardless of who receives the credit. From the system's perspective, there's little reason to change an arrangement that already works. That realization can feel unfair because it challenges a belief many professionals have carried for years. We want to believe that hard work automatically creates value. We want to believe that effort speaks for itself, but effort rarely speaks for itself. People interpret effort through what they can see. They remember what becomes visible. They reward what appears connected to results. And if your contribution remains hidden behind constant availability, the value you're creating may never be perceived as clearly as you imagine. That's why some of the people advancing fastest aren't necessarily the hardest workers. They're often the people making deliberate decisions about where to invest their time. They choose opportunities that increase visibility. They prioritize projects that create influence. They understand the difference between being busy and being strategically valuable. From the outside, that behavior can look selfish. It can seem as though they're protecting themselves while everyone else carries the burden. But in many cases, it's not selfishness at all. It's clarity. It's the understanding that professional energy is a finite resource. And like any valuable resource, where you invest it matters far more than how much of it you give away. Once you understand that distinction, an uncomfortable question begins to emerge. If being useful isn't enough, why do so many people spend their entire careers trying to prove their value that way? The answer has less to do with ambition than most people think. It has to do with fear, and that's exactly where the system becomes most effective. The real cost: visibility, direction, and respect. The consequences of constant availability rarely appear overnight. They accumulate quietly over months and years, hidden beneath the routine of solving problems, meeting expectations, and helping wherever help is needed. Because the immediate rewards seem positive, most people never stop to examine the long-term cost. They assume that being indispensable will eventually create opportunity. What they fail to realize is that some of the most significant career losses don't arrive as dramatic setbacks. They arrive as opportunities that never materialize, recognition that never comes, and influence that slowly shifts toward people who were more deliberate about where they invested their energy. Most people assume the primary cost of always being available is exhaustion. Burnout is certainly part of the equation, but it isn't the most damaging consequence. The deeper costs are far less visible. They appear in the gradual loss of visibility, the erosion of professional direction, and the subtle decline in the respect others have for your time. These losses are difficult to measure because they don't happen all at once. They emerge so slowly that many professionals don't recognize them until years have passed. Think about the last time someone presented an idea, an analysis, or a solution that you were largely responsible for creating. Perhaps you gathered the data, developed the recommendation, or solved the problem that made the outcome possible. Yet when the work was presented, your contribution remained largely invisible. Your name wasn't mentioned, your role wasn't highlighted, and the recognition flowed elsewhere. It may have felt like an isolated incident, but in many organizations, it is the predictable result of a much larger pattern. When you consistently focus on doing the work without making the work visible, you create opportunities for others to become associated with the value you produced.